All right, I enjoy sports, and I think most of you probably know that by now. I've talked about that before, so I'm going to ask you to forgive me as I begin my lesson this morning and draw from my sports knowledge a little bit. But what you're going to find out is maybe it's not so great as I think it is at times. My guess is most of you, whether you realize it or not, like if you think back, you played a bunch of pickup sports games with friends in the neighborhood. How many of you did that? Think back with me. Yeah, okay, so that's pretty much everybody. So I remember with my group of friends on our street and in our neighborhood playing street hockey. We played lots and lots of street hockey. We played lots and lots of backyard baseball. In fact, the next door neighbor to one of my friends down the street had this pitching cage, and to us, we called it the Green Monster. Like in Boston, we called it the Green Monster because it was this huge thing. Now, I was young, so it probably wasn't that big, but I remember it being just huge. And our goal was to hit over the Green Monster, right? To hit a home run, you had to hit over the Green. I remember playing these things, playing pickup basketball games in my driveway with my friends. And what I've come to learn, as I said, maybe I didn't know all that I thought I knew. What I've come to learn as I've grown and really learned the rules of baseball and basketball and football and hockey and all these other sports, is that we didn't really play by the rules when we played pickup games of these sports. We played by our rules, but maybe those weren't really quite the rules of the actual games that we were attempting to play. You know, we interpreted what we saw on TV, and then we put it into practice on our own in our games. Imagine with me, keeping that in mind, that you're a school teacher, say to some middle schoolers, and you walk outside at recess one day, and you notice that you see a bunch of students, they're playing a game of pickup football. They're tossing it around, and you begin to overhear them, and you realize they're playing by their own rules. And you begin to think, wait a minute. No, that's not what pass interference is, or no, here's what a catch really is. You walk over and you select 11 of them, and you say, all right, you're going to be my team for now, and I'm really going to teach you about football. You assume that they know something of the game. They're playing it, right? And you've overheard them talking about the rules in at least a weird sort of way. But you begin to explain to them a new way to play the game. You tell them that the rules are different than the way that they've understood them in the past. And so you have to begin to explain to them the way that they've been playing on the playground is not how they are going to play in a real game, a real match, right? You can't play by those rules, by your made-up rules. But how do you explain it? What do? Do you pull out the NFL rulebook? Have you ever looked at the NFL rulebook? I decided to this week. Anybody want to take a guess at how long the NFL rulebook is? It's 87 pages long. 87 pages. 87 pages of rules. Again, I know that because I looked it up. Even taking out the cover page, the preface, the index pages at the end, let's say that that's roughly about 10 pages. So now we're at 75 pages of rules of interpreting hand signals, and I went through like the 15 pages of hand signals. 75 pages of rules. So imagine you sit your middle schoolers down and you go, let us read together from the rule book and figure this out. What are they going to do? Yeah, they're going to drift off within 2 minutes and you're going to have lost them, right? So how do you do that? How do you boil 75 pages of important rules, right? These are important rules. They're to keep players safe, to make sure the game is equitable so that both sides get a fair deal in it. How do you boil 75 pages down into something that's explicable for middle schoolers? What if you were to give them 4 to 5 things that they need to do and about 4 to 5 things that they should not do? They could probably remember most of those, right? 4 to 5 things each, about 10 things. They could probably remember most of those and begin to get most of those right. I want you to keep this in mind as we read Luke chapter 6. I think this is precisely what Jesus is doing in the sermon that we're about to read. He's taken this huge rule book that they have in the law, and he said, I could go through point by point and interpret that for you and talk about it with you, but your eyes are going to glaze over. You're going to stop listening within 2 minutes, and it's not going to matter anymore. And so instead, what he does is he says, I'm not covering the 75 pages. I'm going to give you 4 to 5 things you need to look out for and 4 to 5 things to not do. And that's basically going to cover you for the way that you should behave as somebody who follows me. And I think that's a really brilliant move by Jesus to do. So let's read what he has to say in Luke chapter 6, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit more. It's beginning at verse 17, the word of the Lord in Luke's gospel. When they came down from the mountain, the disciples stood with Jesus on a large level area, surrounded by many of his followers and by the crowds. There were people from all over Judea and from Jerusalem and from as far north as the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those troubled by evil spirits were healed. Everyone tried to touch him because healing power went out from him, and he healed everyone. Then Jesus turned to his disciples and said, God blesses you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. God blesses you who are hungry now, for you will be satisfied. God blesses you who weep now, for in due time you will laugh. What blessings await you when people hate you and exclude you and mock you and curse you as evil because you follow the Son of Man. When that happens, be happy. Yes, leap for joy, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, their ancestors treated the ancient prophets that same way. What sorrow awaits you who are rich, for you have your only happiness now. What sorrow awaits you who are fat and prosperous now, for a time of awful hunger awaits you. What sorrow awaits you who laugh now, for your laughing will turn to mourning and sorrow. What sorrow awaits you who are praised by the crowds, for their ancestors also praised the false prophets. But to you who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, offer the other cheek also. If someone demands your coat, offer your shirt also. Give to anyone who asks, and when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Do to others as you would like them to do to you. If you love only those who love you, why should you get any credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, why should you get credit? Even sinners do that much. And if you lend money only to those who can repay you, why should you get credit? Even sinners will lend to other sinners for a full return. Love your enemies. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to be repaid. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you will truly be acting as children of the Most High, for He is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn others, or it will come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven. Give, and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. Some strong words from Jesus here. Some words that I'm not quite sure that we yet have taken to heart the way that we should. So let's look at this Sermon on the Plain, at these Beatitudes and woes for a moment. This Sermon on the Plain, or as Matthew calls it, the Sermon on the Mount, and think it's fairly clear, to me at least, that Luke is providing here a trimmed-down version of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. It's precisely to the disciples what I was describing before I read. The disciples are Jesus' middle schoolers. He's the teacher who's come to them. He's heard them talking. He's listened to them speaking about the rules of the game, the rules of how to follow God. And he's thinking, okay, you have some of it right. You have your backyard sort of rules down. They're kind of close. Like the game resembles, you're playing with the same size ball. It looks like you're playing the same sort of game, but you're missing some fundamental truths here. You're missing the most important parts of how to play. Luke gives us these bullet point versions from Jesus. It's not the whole story. It doesn't provide all the rules to the game. It's not the full 75 pages. But it's enough that a person could hear it. A person could understand the type of person that Jesus wants them to be, how to act, and then go and actually live it out. Begin to make a difference in their own life and in the world. You might be wondering why Luke's version is shorter than Matthew's. Well, a couple of reasons why, as options. One, Matthew's version includes teachings that Jesus actually gave outside of this particular Sermon on the Mount, but were all put together within the sermon because that's what they did in ancient times. They would often take teachings that didn't maybe happen at that particular moment, and they put them into this grand sermon that somebody might have spoken. So they're true words of Jesus. It's not that they were never spoken by him, but perhaps not spoken at this exact moment. That's one way to look at it. A second way is that Luke clearly knows Matthew's version and doesn't feel compelled to give the full version of it. He doesn't feel compelled to replicate word for word exactly what Matthew had written down. So Luke gives his shorter version to hit on what he perceived as the most pressing highlights. I think that's another good way to look at it. And then an even third way to look at it is one of Matthew's main concerns is that Jesus look and sound like a Jewish teacher, like a rabbi. So in Matthew's version, you hear Jesus say over and over again, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." Well, that was a common refrain from the Jewish teachers. They would say, "You've heard it said by so-and-so, but I say to you," or, "But I'm going to interpret another way that somebody has said it that is better than a way that you've heard before." That's what Jesus is doing in Matthew, because Matthew needs Jesus to look like a good Jewish teacher, because Matthew's writing to a Jewish community. Luke, on the other hand, we believe was writing mostly to Gentiles. They're not concerned with Jesus looking like a Jewish teacher. They don't need that common refrain over and over again. They don't need Jesus to interpret the law for them. They need to hear the boilerplate, here's how to be the kind of person that Jesus wants you to be. And so Luke takes those things out. Not that they're not good, and not that they're not words of Jesus, but it's what needed to be communicated to the community for which Luke was writing. I think all those are good ways of looking at it and are true to the styles and the type of writer that each Matthew and Luke were. But in this sermon, Jesus is giving his disciples the Quick Notes version of the rules to the game. He gives them 4 blessings and 4 blessings / beatitudes and 4 woes. This might be a counterpoint to what I just said a moment ago about Luke not caring to show Jesus as interpreting Jewish law, but what essentially Jesus does here is reshape and reframe Deuteronomy without him explicitly saying that's what he's doing. In Deuteronomy, you can go look in chapter 28. Do it on your own time, not right now. In chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, Moses gives this really long list. It's really long. Deuteronomy 28 is very, very long. Gives this very long list of do's and don'ts, of beatitudes and woes or sorrows on the person who does such and such. What do we know Jesus is doing by coming here, teaching the way that he does, being the person that he is? He's establishing a new covenant with God's people. Deuteronomy was part of the covenant with God's people. So what Jesus is doing is he's reinterpreting, he's reshaping, he's reframing the covenant in this new way. And it's honestly a very radical version that Jesus is giving us. The world would look at Jesus' words and say, that's really upside down. You're saying happy are those who are poor? Blessed are those who are poor? Jesus, that's crazy. Blessed are those who are mourning and sad? Come on, Jesus. Get real. We all know that's not true. Blessed are those who have everything. Blessed are those who are happy beyond belief, is what the world would say. And so the world would see this version of Jesus as upside down. But we know because of Jesus that this is the right way up sort of code, in opposition to the upside down ones of the world. Jesus is once again announcing that God is doing something new, something different in this world. He's announcing the very thing that Simeon and Anna, remember them from a few weeks ago in Luke chapter 2? He's announcing the very thing that they, Simeon and Anna, declared back when Jesus was in the temple as a baby. Jesus is fulfilling the promises made and declaring that good news has and is coming through him. It's not that there's anything inherently virtuous about being poor or hungry or sad. There's nothing really virtuous about those things. But when injustice reigns, when injustice is in power, as it was in Jesus' day, and frankly, as it is in ours as well, the world needs to be set right. And God's kingdom is the only force that can do that for the long haul. We keep trying. We keep coming up with new ways of organizing government to try to alleviate the suffering of the world. And we've done some good. I'm not going to say we haven't done any good, but we will never, ever come up with anything that will do the good that God's kingdom will do in this world. And all of that, everything that God's kingdom is shaped and framed around, is love and mercy. This section of this particular sermon, I think, still ruffles a lot of feathers to this day. And I assure you it would have done so when Jesus first spoke it. Imagine someone right now. You can drift off for a moment as I ask you to imagine. Imagine someone right now that you truly dislike or despise even. Imagine somebody right now. Now imagine, even in your dislike of them, that you choose to do the absolute best thing you could possibly ever think of to do for them. Imagine that you did that. The kingdom Jesus taught about and demonstrates involves this sort of unheard of generosity. This sort of way of looking at people as, even though Jesus here calls them enemies twice, love your enemies. He's using that word almost ironically, I think. It's almost like in The Princess Bride. Anybody familiar with that movie? It's one of my favorite movies. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Jesus keeps using the word enemy, but the truth is he's undercutting it the whole time. That the very people you're calling enemies are not actually your enemies. Because the way you treat them is not the way that you would treat an enemy. It's almost like Jesus is saying, there is no real enemy to a Christian. From nonviolence, offering your other cheek after you've been struck, to giving to those in need, from loving others and doing good for them, All of it is framed around a central idea that doing the things Jesus describes in verses 29 through 35 make you like God. This is the way that God treats these people. If you want to be like God, then you too must treat people in this way. If you want to know what God is like, go back and read those verses again. God is compassionate and merciful. How could we, who are ourselves forgiven, be any less compassionate and merciful and forgiving to others? So only when we truly model and demonstrate this sort of godlike compassion and mercy will the world truly begin to understand the God we worship. That the God we worship is different. The God we worship isn't like all the other gods of the world. See, it throws a wrench in the whole argument that all gods are the same, or that all religious texts point to the same sort or kind of God. That's just not true. Our God is overwhelmingly merciful. Our God is indescribably gracious. Our God is different than all the other gods. Because to our God, there are no enemies. And so to us, there are no enemies. Because we treat everybody with dignity and respect and love and care and forgiveness. Because that's what Jesus says makes us like God. And yet we're really terrible at it. How can we be so terrible at being like God? We don't have to memorize 75 pages of rules. We just got to get that right. We're so terrible at it. How can we be so terrible at being like God? It's incredibly frustrating. And I'm talking about myself too. The God we worship is different. The God we worship demands for us to be different. And it makes me wonder what a society would actually look like if we actually tried to do these things that Jesus talks about. I mean, for one, throw out violence. There'd be no more violence. And even if there were, you'd have a bunch of people saying, "Oh, cool, you hit me? Hit me over here too. I don't fight you back." Because violence begets violence, begets violence, begets violence, and it's a never-ending cycle. You hit me, so I hit you. And Jesus says, stop it. And so if we had a society modeled on that, there'd be no more violence. How cool would that be? How cool would that be? Jesus has asked us to do that. Isn't that crazy? That Jesus has asked us to do that? Even when others don't follow that way, we're supposed to follow that way. So when somebody hits you, don't hit them back. That people would actually look out for the needs of others, of their neighbors, would recognize that their neighbors are hurting and say, how can I help you? And then not say in the follow-up, oh, and by the way, 6 months from now, you're going to owe me interest on whatever I let you borrow. No, instead we say, here's this gift. Don't even bother beginning to try to pay me back. I'm doing this for you because you're a person in need. Somebody that I love, somebody that needs care. It would be a society where even those we dislike, even those we despise, would be recipients of our love. It would look very different than anywhere I've ever heard of described in this world. Living this way, doing the things that Jesus lays out for us in this chapter, are things which make us like God. So why aren't we doing them? If for no other reason than that, these things ought to be high priorities for us. Love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness. Those sound exactly like the kind of person that I want to be, but I fail constantly. So maybe we try better this week. Maybe we try harder this week to put these things into practice, to make this sermon come alive for us. Not my sermon, Jesus' sermon. To come alive for us this week. Maybe we can do that together. A couple of things to think about and take away. The first is, I want you to imagine if Jesus were to show up right now, what sort of blessings and woes would he announce to us? What upside-down code is needed now? Or what appears to be an upside-down code? Would it sound very similar to what he said to them 2,000 years ago? Or would he have new things to add, to put on our plate? Things that we're failing at. Second thing is, we don't actually have a society like the one I was describing. Boy, I wish we did. But what is our role in helping to make a society like the one Jesus had in mind? How do we go about doing that? One of the responses to that was that Christians would go off and make their own little communities. That they would go set up a society like that. And that sounds good until you realize that it takes you away from the people, the very people that you're supposed to be modeling that for. So that can't be the answer. And it can't be the answer that we assimilate so much to the societies of the world that we stop looking like Christians. That we stop acting like the very people that Jesus wants us to be. There's got to be some middle ground there that we can fit into and actually show people who we are. What does that look like for us right now? That's Luke chapter 6, or at least what I wanted to talk about from Luke chapter 6. Next week, chapter 7. We're going to come to our family time now, our time to share with each other. We've had a lot of prayer needs over the last few weeks from sick people to family members who are sick and loved ones dying, all those sort of things. That's what we're here to do for each other, is to pray, to comfort, to surround each other and be a comforting place to talk about those things. Maybe you need that this morning. Maybe you have a prayer need that you want to let us know about. Maybe you have something that you're excited about, something joyful that you want to share with this family so that we can rejoice with you. That's what we're here to do as a family. So anything that you want to let us know about, do so as we stand and sing.